What's going on, everybody? What's happening? It's your girl Tiffany coming through right here live in effect. Peace and power, elevation be to all of you. Salam alaikum, Ramadan Mubarak to all you beautiful people out there. Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell and share the channel. Share the video if you like the content. Give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the content, give it a thumbs down. That's cool with me. All right, so today I'm going to go into more detail about Islam because, this is the month of Ramadan. So I want to make it a focus about, West African history and Islamic history and also the different branches of Islam and whatnot. So today I'm going to talk about Timbuktu and get into the Islamic Golden Age. All right, and if I'm not able to do the one about Islamic Golden Age, then I have to make a separate video for later on. But we're going to talk about Timbuktu first, okay? So Timbuktu, right, is a city in Mali. It's a city in Mali. It's an ancient city, actually. It has a lot of it's a lot of history going on behind the city. Thank you, brother. I appreciate that, brother. Thank you, brother Davey. I appreciate that a lot. So anyways, that's a lot of historical information regarding to this city of Timbuktu. And we talking about on the scholastic level, all right? And there's 3 mosques which make up what is called the University of Timbuktu. And I'm going to go into those information as well. So just give you a brief outline of history. So the reason why I'm doing this, because see, when we deal with the West African culture, right, you got to talk about Islam, all right? Because predominantly speaking, Islam makes up majority of the West African population, all right, whether it be Sufi or Sunni. So we come from these descendants of these people, all right, and you don't hear much about Timbuktu. You're not going to get much information on it, okay? So I'm going to be speaking on that. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and show some images real fast. Then I'm going to get to the source. All right, so if you guys can see this picture right here, there's a man that's walking past. Now, this is one of the mosques in Timbuktu. Okay, as you can see, it looks very desert-like, and it is. So that's Timbuktu. Then I got another image I want to show you guys. All right, as you guys can see, that's another image right there. That's a better picture. That's the mosque, and that's right there in Mali again. That's in Timbuktu. Okay. All right, so today I'm going to present the PDF. And if you guys want to look more into the information, you can also just type it up on Wiki1 or Wikipedia about Timbuktu. But I'm going to show you some PDFs, some books, and some articles and stuff. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's get started with if you guys can see my screen. Hopefully y'all can see that screen. Cool. All right, so let's get started with the with this book right here. I'm trying to show y'all the cover. It's called Beyond Timbuktu: An Intellectual History. An Intellectual History of Muslim West Africa. Okay. And who is it by? Let's look at the title. All right, it's about Osman Omar Kane. Osman Omar Kane. And this was written. It was written in 2016. So that's been about 5 years ago, not too long ago. Okay. So of course, then you'll go into the table of contents. Right, as you can see right here on the table of contents, I had to zoom it in. So you got the first chapter, Timbuktu, the geopolitics of the sources. Then you got the growth and political economics of Islamic scholarship and Bilal al-Sudan. All right. Then go further down, it goes into curriculum and knowledge transmission. And then you got the Islamic education and the colonial encounter, modern Islamic institution of higher learning, Islam in the post-colonial public sphere, Abrophones, triumphs, Timbuktu under Islamic rule. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to chapter 1 because I had some information highlighted in here. All right, so this is chapter 1. And I'm going to zoom it up again so you guys can see. All right, so right here, it says, at this point, we leave Africa, not to mention it again, for it is no historical part of the world. It has no movement or development to exhibit. Historical movements in it. Its northern part belong to the Asiatic or European world. Carthage displayed there an important transitionary phase of civilization, but as a Phoenician colony, it belongs to Asia. Egypt will be considered in reference to the passage of the human mind from its eastern to its western phase, but it does not belong to the African spirit. What we properly understand by Africa is the unhistorical, undevelopment spirit, and then still involved in the condition of the mer nature, and which had to be present here only as on the threshold of the world's history. So this was quoted by George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, a European, of course. So anyways, let's go down. It says, in the first decade of the 21st century, a few treatises of Sufism written by West African scholars were translated into European languages, including Sheikh Ibrahim Nazai magnum opus, Kashif al-Iblas, Removal of Confusion. In this treatise, centered on clarifying the doctrine of the Tijaniya Tariq and establishing his own authority as the spiritual heir of Ahmad al-Tijani, Sheikh Ibrahim Nazi cites work on exegesis of the Quran, prophetic tradition, jurisprudence, theology, grammar, religious principle, the biography of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and of course Sufism. Authors cited by Sheikh Ibrahim Nassis, as well as many other West African Sufis, come from a variety of regions, including Turkey, India, North and West Africa, Persia, and Al-Andalus, which is evidence that they participate in a global network of intellectual exchange. Okay, so go further down. It says, as highlighted by late Columbia University professor Edward Said in his study linking the intellectual labor of 18th and 19th century scholars of the Orient to the European project of imperial hegemony, the interaction between power and knowledge has been obvious in the creation of European representation of the Orient in general and of Islam in particular, especially in early colonial West Africa. The construction of imperial hegemony, that is the domination based more on consent than cohesion, shaped the academic division of labor because they faced fierce opposition from Muslim leaders in North and West Africa during the colonial conquest. One of the greatest fears of European colonial powers throughout their rule was pan-Islamism. All right. To exorcise that fear, the powers conceived of Africa as two main zones along the lines of Hegel's representation, the North and the South separated by the Sahara Desert, a barrier that they strove to maintain both by restricting the movement of colonial subject between North and West Africa and by the colonial hegemonic discourses. Considered part of the center of the Islamic world, the Arabic-speaking North received greater attention from Oriental, Orientalists trained in Semitic philology, who focused on the collection, edition, and translation of Arabic texts, assumed to be superficially Islamized, peripheral to Islamic world, intellectually interior, and completely outside of history. West Africa was to a large extent left to African studies scholars who had little interest in Islam. All right. So let's go down to the knowledge and curriculum. So as you see, the author is basically explaining how there was some form of domination and the European wanted to gain control and power over the West African region because they were in fear about the pan-Islamic coalition taking place. And as you can see, many of the country, right, especially within North Africa, on the other side, like Egypt and Sudan and all of that, is under the Arabs' control, pretty much. So it's been predominantly controlled by the Arabs for the past centuries. Okay. And of course, West Africa, I mean, although you have black leadership and power, but still it has that colonial concept from, you know, the French being there, the British, the Germans, etc. And of course, many of them, again, is under Islamic concept, but you know, they still have the colonial ways of their colonizer still to this day. All right, so right here, curriculum and knowledge transmission. Before only God existed, when he wanted other beings to come to existence, he manifests himself in himself. From the being that was his manifestation, God created Muhammadan reality. From the Muhammadan reality, God created the sea. From the sea, God created foam. The sea cannot be quiet because it was created from a living being and reflects the manifestation of God. Of all creatures, the sea is the one that resembles God most in richness, wideness, and generosity. In the sea, we find fish and jewels. Both can circulate without harming the sea in any way. From foam, God created earth. From earth, he created Adam and Eve. That is why Sheikh Ibrahim that's why Sheikh Ibrahim said that only God existed before anything else exists. And even now that other beings seem to exist, in fact, only God exists. If you return each person to his parents and their parents to their parents, ultimately you will go back to Adam and Eve. If you return Adam and Eve to the earth to the sea to Muhammadan reality to God, then you realize that nothing else exists except God. If you ask a human being to show you himself, he would show you a part of his body, but will not show you himself. The truth is that God is present in all human beings, regardless of their awareness or lack thereof. Proximity is a veil. When something is too close to you, you cannot see it. The Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, I originate from the light of God. Human beings originate from my light. Sheikh Hadi Nasi. All right. So right here in this chapter, and I'm in chapter 4, it says the Prophet Muhammad is known as the messenger of God to the Arabs. But for the Sufis, the Akbarian tradition, the prophet was created as a light, nur, and a reality, which is hakika, before any being. The notion of Muhammadan reality put forward by Sufis is important for an understanding of devotional Sufi poetry learned and taught to the students of higher Islamic studies and through lecture to the masses. The above abstract could have been taken from a Sufi treatise in Arabic, but it was delivered in Wolof to a public of devotees. Okay, attenders took no notes, but many would be able to transmit this cosmology in any language to larger audience. Scholars use text, but most knowledge transmission was oral. Many scholars were learned in Arabic, but most of their commentary were conducted in African languages. The oral and the written African languages and Arabic were two faces of the same coin in this system of knowledge transmission. And it goes on to say, from the secondary literature as well as in the autobiographies of West African Muslim scholars, we get a good idea of the text that circulated most in the pre-colonial Balad al-Sudan. Bruce Hall and Charles Stewart must be credited for the first serious effort to develop a rigorous methodology towards identifying the historic core curriculum in the larger West African Sahel. On the strength of an online database containing more than 21,000 West African Islamic manuscripts preserved in collection of manuscripts in the West and Central Sudan, and focusing on the period from roughly 1625 to 1925, they identify six disciplines: Quran, the Prophet Muhammad, jurisprudence, Arabic language, theology, and Sufism. Drawing on that literature, and especially on Stewart and Hall, this chapter attempts to identify what subjects texts were taught and how. It identifies the following as central in Islamic education: the Quran and related sciences, legal studies, hadith, sharia, and devotional poetry, theology, Sufism, Arabic language, talismanic science, and last but not least, African language lexicology. In the sessions that follow, I will discuss these subjects as well as the most widely circulating texts written in oral form in Muslim West Africa. So, as you can see, the author laid out the foundation here, okay? So he spoke a little bit in this paragraph about the manuscripts, okay, and the sixth discipline. So as you can see, Quran, the Prophet Muhammad, jurisprudence, Arabic language, theology, and Sufism. So let's go ahead and go down where it says the Quran and related sciences. It says, prominent among subjects studied in West Africa was the Quran and derived sciences such as memorization, exegesis, and the art of its Samadali or Samdali. Arabic has always been used as the language for the most important Islamic rituals, including the 5 daily prayers, the Friday congregational prayer, and the annual festival celebrating the end of the month of Ramadan, okay, which is Al-Fir, and commemorating Abraham's commitments to sacrifice his son, with the notable exception of Kemalist Turkey, where attempts failed to replace Arabic with Turkish as the liturgical language for the call to prayer. Nowhere in the Muslim world has any language except Arabic had ever been used for canonical prayer. Different from supplication, which can be said in any language, regardless of language and nationality, Muslims must commit at least some parts of the Quran to memorize. All right. So as you can see, he shows the correlation between the Quran and the science. All right, so let's go down here to look at the modern institution. That's chapter 7. So it says modern Islamic institution of higher learning. All right, the various branches of learning in the science, law, arts, and humanities, as well as the social science, are heavily indebted to the system of inquiry from the West that rejects, condemns, and disregards revelation as a source and meaning of gaining, development, and dismantling knowledge or disseminating knowledge in our sensory world. There is now an urge and imperative need to classify, research, develop, and disseminate knowledge from a comprehensive Islamic methodological framework. So this was quoted by Bafa Alu Umar. So right here it says the Ottoman Empire, which ruled over virtually all Arabic-speaking lands, undertook major administrative, legal, and political, military, and educational reforms in the 19th century to halt its decline. It was in this context, that the organization of higher learning started to change and modernize in the Middle East and North Africa. Remarkable in this respect was the transition of the Al-Azhar institution in Cairo from a medieval type of Islamic college to a university in the modern sense of the word. Starting in 1872, these reforms were pursued throughout the 20th century and culminated in 1961 with reforms imposed by former Egyptian President Nasser. As previously mentioned, modern Islamic institutions of higher learning were established in West Africa beginning only in the mid-1980s. Prior to that, West Africans who wanted to pursue higher Islamic studies leading to the award of accredited degree had two options. The first was to join the North African universities such as Al-Azhar University, where Arabic is the dominant language of instruction. The other option was to gain admission to the departments of Arabic and Islamic studies in West African University, largely inspired by the European or Orientalist tradition. It was mostly Western scholars who had started these departments and provided instruction mainly in English or French. Okay. It says most graduate of the Islamic educational system could not qualify because of their lack of proficiency in European languages. So between 1987 and 2013, several modern Islamic institutions of higher learning were established in sub-Saharan Africa. They enable increasing numbers of Arabophones to pursue higher education in their own country. These schools are playing an important development role, first by providing educational opportunities to many hitherto excluded groups, and second by bridging the gaps between purely religious education and more general education in the arts, science, and technology. This chapter will situate their emergence in a post-colonial context marked by two paradigm shifts that led to the Islamization of knowledge and the liberalization of education. All right. So now, again, if you guys want to check out this book, it's a great book to check out that goes into about Timbuktu. So it's called Beyond Timbuktu: An Intellectual History of Muslim West Africa by Usman Umar Kane. Usman Umar Kane. Hello, everybody. Hello to the chat. Greeting to the chat. Peace. Peace to the chat. Thank y'all for coming through. Hello. All right. So let's go ahead and let's look at the So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one. It's called African Dominion, a New History of Empire in Early and Medieval West Africa. Okay. And once again, what do you see right here? Timbuktu, Mali. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the title, of course. And it was written by Michael A. Gomez. And let me zoom this up. All right, and it was written in 2018, which was about 3 years ago. That wasn't too long ago. All right, and these are the table of contents. Okay. All right, so as you can see, that's part 1, the early Sahel and Savannah. Chapter 1, the middle Niger and pre-antiquity and global context. Early Gao, the kingdoms of Ghana reformed along the Senegal River. Slavery and race imagined in Balid as Sudan. All right, so Imperial Mali, the meaning of Sajanta and the dawn of Imperial Mali, Massa Musa and Global Mali, Intrigue Islam and Ibn Buta. And then you got part 3, Imperial Sungai, Sunni Ali and the reinvention of Sungai. All right, and then part 4, this is in French. It's Le Dernier de l'Empire. All right, so as you can see, these are the chapters. So it's 14 chapters in this book. All right, so let me go to the one that I have highlighted. All right, so right here, the meaning of Sanjanta and the dawn of Imperial Mali. So as you can see right here, the transition from a discussion of the early Savannah and Sahel to the temporal thresholds of that combined regions, medieval history in the 6th and 12th and 7th and /13th century is to undergo a radical shift in both the period's evidentiary base as well as its theme. Okay, with respect to the former, the interest and reliability of external Arabic documentation weakens focus as it had been on developments within the spatial frontiers of an internal littoral. Beyond those frontiers, an actual Arab or Berber present rarely registers, such that the dawn of a different geopolitical era is at best obscure. In the lacuna has been mobilized a genre of oral tradition, refined to an art form of exceptional quality while posing unique challenges, affording limited rather than scopic insight into a formative period of West African polity that constitutes the very core, the iconic center of subsequent lay and scholarly imagination. There emerges a new articulation in medieval West Africa, the empire, and so begins an analysis of a political formation lasting some 350 years. Though this desperate in orientation, preoccupation, and circumstances of production, written and oral sources are in other ways proximate. The oral sources, though the instrumentality of the Jetli or Griot, are primarily concerned with the rise of Imperial Mali and the life of its founder, Sanjanta, the collective narrative often present in the form of an epic, as its various iteration contains sufficient points of correspondence and formulaic substance to more or less constitute a composite generalized account. And right here, it also says, in embracing the challenge of relating the oral corpus to others, more verifiable sources, the current approach places all into conversation with the rise of Sujata and Mali, taking on a more complicated texture, better engaged with his historicity, while more distant to multiple imbrication of meaning, bridging Savannah and Sahel. All right, so it goes on to say, as a vehicle of memorialization, Oral tradition is an ingenious tool through which the severalty of truths and events is communicated. At times, employing the fantastical and often by means of the allegorical, the multiple dimension of the human condition are represented in dramatic and artistic fashion, reanimating the past while resuscitating links, if not dissoluble bonds between the living and the dead, conveying purpose and identifying and rank while revealing life's mysteries and vicissitudes. And paying serious attention to the jello, the approach here is at some variance with those for whom only verifiable facts is of interest, for whom orality is unresponsive. Though understandable, such a position can be unproductive, unnecessarily ratifying dichotomies of verity and legend. The jelly accounts are inconsistent and flatter is a valid concern, but as critical is the consideration of what the griots actually convey, rather than an approach of Western arrogation and assumption of a vacuity and inquiry open to cultural asymmetries is better able to navigate permutation and nuance, mitigating unnecessary tension with conventional evidentiary standards. All right, so as opposed to viewing divergent sources as hierarchical and competitive in historical claims, making the approach here places them into dialogue whereby the external written and records shed lights on political developments, while the oral corpus affords insight into their cultural and social dimension, a complex of consanguinity and beliefs and retrospective that informs the historical period, resulting in a mutually disquisitional relation between the written external record and oral internal memory. Okay. The epic form of the Sanjata narrative is treated here as fundamentally in a declaration of the integral elements of empire as understood by the Mende, featuring how it is thought to have come into being in modalities which is operated as affected hundred of years after the period in question. The corpus may serve more contemporary interests, but to the degree that earlier oral accounts were actually formed during the historical period, they represent an attempt at recording and legitimate empire. All right, so let's stop right there. So let's go to the next one about the imperial sun god. All right, so right here in this chapter, which is chapter 8, it goes into the concept about Sunni Ali and the reinvention of sun god. All right, so if you guys don't know, sun god was an empire in West Africa, so which makes up the country like Senegal all the way up to Niger and those places. All right, anyhow, let me go ahead and read it. So the mid-9th and 15th century arrival of the Portuguese along the West African coast was not the principal reason for reorientation of power in the region, as that process had begun at least 50 years prior in the aftermath of Massa Suleiman reign. Mali flattered due to succession dispute and tied them with a central administrative apparatus challenged by a sprawling territorial expanse. Growing Malian weakness encouraged the rise of an alternative political formation, and though Mali would continue well into the 11th and 17th century, it would do so in diminished form, losing control over vital spaces of commercial and cultural exchange in both the Senegal and Niger valleys. The middle Niger is the focus of what follows, where Don a plati that though thither to the Malian antecedent in important ways, nonetheless forged a model of state power never before witnessed there. And so right here, it says the on-site sun god was in fact a re-emergence, and that is recentered the ancient town of Gao, capital of the novel experiment. In inheriting the mantle of Mali, sun god would undertake important innovation in meeting the demands of international commerce, ethnic diversity, and Islam's expansion. All right. By way of serial effort, experimentation, and even regiment change, sun god boldly attempted the realization of a pluralistic society fully reflective of its multiple constituencies and approach premised on a new theory of governance in which spheres of influence were distributed or were disturbed to shareholders as were distributed to shareholders as self-organizing groups or communities, a policy made evident and articulated through practice and convention. Spheres with the highest levels of influence were those of the mosque and the state, intersecting with each other as well as with other spaces largely defined by ethnic and occupational interests, informed by both local practice and international engagement. Sun god would eventually achieve a remarkable social compact by which new levels of mutual respect and tolerance were reached, and through which sun god came to be characterized. In this way, it distinguished itself from its Malian predecessor, for although inclusive of non-Mende elements, the Malian Empire was first and foremost a Mende operation in which the Mende sought to control all levers of political, social, and cultural power, something even Mansa Musa sought to consolidate through his indigenization program. In contrast, sun god would evolve differently, becoming a much more ethnically heterogeneous society in which allegiance to the state transcended loyalties to clan culture, with its leadership becoming much more diverse. All right. So, anyways, that's this book, which is called The African Dominion and a New History of Empire in Early and Medieval West Africa. So if you guys want to check out more, you can. You can download the PDF, and you can also find it on Amazon. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead and share some more information. So we're going to talk about this book right here. So this book, or this article PDF, is called The Meaning of Timbuktu, which is edited by Shamil Jepi and Suleiman Bashir Dajeh. Okay. And it was published in 2008. Now it goes on to show you the map, the country. As you can see, states at their height: Ghana, AD, Mali, AD 1230, sun god, AD 460. All right. Major trade routes, local trade routes, and European trade routes. So the green represent the European trade routes. Okay. And the local trade routes, which is the little thin lines, as you can see. Okay. That's the trade routes. The little thin line is local, and the thicker ones, the ones that's very spacey, is the European trade route. All right, so you can see the Arabic manuscripts over here. So these are the table of content. You can just go down here and check out the table of content, etc. All right, so as you can see, it says Part 1, Introduction to Timbuktu Region. Okay. It says Part 2, African Arabic Literature as a Source of History. All right. And Part 3, Scholars of Timbuktu. Part 4, the Timbuktu Libraries. And Part 5, Beyond Timbuktu. All right, so let's look at all right, so let's look at chapter 2. So chapter 2 is called Towards an Intellectual History of West Africa, the Meaning of Timbuktu, Suleiman Bashir Dagman. All right. It says Sheikh Anta Diop, the well-known Senegalese historian, once wrote that centuries before Europe colonized the continent and questioned the primitive character of African mentality, Aristotelian logic was being discussed by local African scholars in places like Timbuktu. Here are Diop or Job exact words. 4 centuries before Levi Burhan wrote his Primitive Mentality, also known by the title How Natives Think, Black Muslim Africa was commenting on Aristotle's formal logic and was devoted to dialectics. I shall question Diop's affirmation later in the chapter, but let me just for the moment comment on its general meaning. What Diop was saying is that it is impossible to give a proper account of the history of philosophy in the African continent while ignoring totally the significance of the penetration of Islamic knowledge in Africa. Because of this ignorance, and I take this word to mean both lack of knowledge or dismissal, the intellectual history of Africa in general, beyond the particular case of philosophy and logic, is still a widely open field to be studied. And this needs to be done in the light of the Islamization of many African regions, a process that became an important factor in sub-Saharan Africa around the 11th century. Such a study would put an end to the preconceived notion that African cultures are oral cultures in essence, and that Africanity is at its very core orality. What Timbuktu and other places where Islamic scholarship was developed teach us is to have a sense of history that opposes this identification of Africa with orality and generalization, which is just not accurate. Of course, orality is important in all cultures and especially in Africa, but we should not ignore the graphic raciality of Islam has meant in many areas the adoption of Arabic, or rather Arabic script, by population who, among other consequence of their conversion to the Muslim religion, literally rewrote who they were and created a written intellectual tradition that we need to study. Wolof, Fulade, Hausa, and Bambara ceased to be oral languages at the very moment when some people trained in the Arabic script in Quranic school. All right, and started writing chronicles, myth, and praise. So as you can see right here, these are the picture of the brothers and they have the Arabic scripts right here. Right, they send down. I'm not sure exactly what they're doing. They're probably just studying the Quran, or they doing, or either they're like writing something in Arabic, like the scripts in Arabic or something. You're writing on the little piece of paper. So yeah, these are the two brothers. Anyways, let me continue. Where did I stop off? Okay, yeah. So Arabic scripts in Quran school started writing chronicles, myths, and praise poetry in these languages. And a new era of African intellectual history was opened when scholars such as those who authored the manuscripts in Timbuktu and elsewhere started writing didactic poetry and prose on jurisprudence, theology, Sufism, and other areas, both in the Arabic language and sometimes in their native tongue. This chapter will consider 3 points in relation to Timbuktu, the best testimony and symbol of this written tradition. The first is what I have called the significance of Islamization as self-rewriting. In the second part, the focus is on the discipline of philosophy in order to show how ignorance of the written tradition represented by Timbuktu has led to the ill-posed question of African philosophy as a debate between ethno-philosophers and Euro-philosophers. In the third part, I study one example of a work that represents the intellectual atmosphere of Timbuktu. All right, so, and this means the gift of the noble ones regarding some of the virtues of the scholars. I conclude with a short lesson that we can draw from that work by the most prestigious Timbuktu scholar, Ahmad Baba. All right. So let's go down to the one about the female scholars. Okay. So chapter 11 deals with Muslim women scholars in the 19th and 20th century, Morocco to Nigeria, Beverly B. Mack. So this one goes into the scholars, the Muslim women who were scholars, who was educators during the time period, all right, in the West African region. So you don't often hear too much about women scholars like that. But hey, let's go ahead. This chapter begins as a comparative study of Muslim women, traditional education in the Maghreb, stretching geographically to include Morocco, northern Nigeria, reflecting long historical connection. The reason for this interest in this topic was to demonstrate linkage between historic Mauritania, including much of contemporary southern Morocco, and the Islamic intellectual communities of northern Nigeria, indicated in a letter written by 19th century Nana Azamu in Nigeria to Mauritanian scholar with whom she was evidently well acquainted. These connections were made by members of the Sufis Qadiriya Brotherhood in the 18th and 19th centuries. Sufi devotees were constantly given to and from between Hauslin and Cairo or Fez, and bringing back accounts of wonderful vision experienced by saintly personality in metropolises. Uthman de Fodio had cordial relation with Sheikh al-Maktir al-Kunti, the leader of a Sufi community centered around Timbuktu, who also had visions. People in contemporary Fez know the Fodio family and easily speak of their many written works. Okay. While the Tijaniya Brotherhood brings many from Nigeria to Morocco. Nigeria is also connected to Morocco through the Sufi Tijaniya Brotherhood, a more recent moving force in Nigerian experience. Many Tijani adherents in northern Nigeria make pilgrimage to Fez, where Al-Tijani tomb is in the Medina. Ooh. Underlying those connections in the significance of northern Nigeria in contemporary times as a formidable Islamic region, constituting half of the continent's most populous country. Though through sheer numbers alone, Nigerian Muslim women are important to any discussion of Islam in Africa. In a comparative context, the pursuit of women scholars in northern Nigeria are very similar to those of women scholars in Morocco in terms of structure and intention. What remains to be studied are the particular works that are used by Moroccan women in pursuing a course of higher education within the framework of traditional Islamic education. Okay. Islamic education in the Maghreb. Recent studies affirm previous perspectives on women activists' role in the region, especially with regard to education. Mauritanian women's responsibility for educating young children echoes the situation of 19th century Muslim women in northern Nigeria. And it remains the same for contemporary families in northern Nigeria, tempered by the addition of daily education outside the home, divided into Islamic and non-Islamic formal education. In addition to providing fundamental education for children, they raise Muslim women in both regions have long been known as teachers of adults in both regions and significant scholars in their own right. Mauritanian women appear to have kept pace with those of the Fodio family in northern Nigeria in terms of educating both young and old and producing sufficient number of their own scholarly works to generate materials that became part of a growing canon of works for scholars who followed. Thus, the attempted to uncover a canon of works used by Muslim women scholars in the Maghreb requires an overview of traditional materials commonly studied in an Islamic education system, as well as attention to works produced by these women as mnemonic aids in their own teaching profession. The Quran is the foundation of both Islamic thought and literacy. It is impossible to imagine Islamic education without the memorization of the Quran, which begins a Muslim child's education. Islamic education continues to the equivalent of the West, right? Postgraduate level through a complex program of courses including a wide range of topics like the natural and physical science, history, geography, sociology, medicine, and mathematics, often at renowned institutions like Al-Azhar University in Cairo and Cairo Madrasa in Fez. As library holdings in Mauritania demonstrate more advanced field of study, include a multitude of topics such as Quranic sciences, Arabic language, mysticism, jurisprudence, scientific manuals, including medicine, astrology, and mathematics, general literature, historical accounts, genealogies, biological dictionaries, chronologies, pilgrimage, memoirs, political material, and general correspondence. Nana Asamu 19th century collection demonstrates comparable breadth. All right, so let's go down to the next one. So let's go down to the part about the female scholars. Okay. It says, female students and scholars, although girls begin their Quranic studies at the same time as boys, they appear to fall away from the system of learning in the adolescent years. The degree to which this is true or only apparent is hard to determine. In many cases, especially in the urban settings, they are simply not visible. Walking along a street in Fez, it is not uncommon to hear a room full of Quranic student boys chanting their lessons upon inquiring why there are no girls. One is assured that the girls are in the class at the back of the house, out of public view. In Kano, it has been the case that girls were educated by an older generation of learned individuals in their home, leading to the misconception that girls are not educated at all. 19th century, Nana Asamu and her sisters, especially Khadija, who translated Khalil, renowned was it Mustajir and into Fulada are not exception. Bala Rebe Sule and Priscilla Starat's 1991 study of female scholars, mystics, and social workers demonstrate the tradition of Islamic learning in a vital one in contemporary northern Nigeria. Okay, so similarly in Fez and McNett's, women run elementary schools for traditional Islamic education, and Sufi women scholars may opt to continue their post-secondary education in traditional programs of study rather than at the Western-oriented university. In addition, it is not uncommon for those who are immersed in traditional life to meet regularly once or twice a week in study groups at a local zawiya for the discussion of a Quranic passage or other pertinent commentary on contemporary issues. In each case, the Zawiya gathering is led by a woman qualified to teach, give a sermon, and answer questions. And I'm going to expound on this once I get done. Even apart from formal system of learning, the idea of the written word preserved in the book is reversed in Muslim cultures. The dual founding precept of Islam, the primacy of the pursuit of knowledge and the confirmation of equity, guide attitudes and make women's scholarship a likely proposition in cultures that have not been overwhelmed by patriarchal limitation. Even in such cultures, women insistence upon their rights as set forth in the Quran motivates them to pursue their intellectual activity. Furthermore, this is not a new concept. Evidence from 10th century Andalusia indicates that girls were attending schools with boys then, and women were writing Wala princess poet was educated in classes including both sexes. All right, traditional influence. The bulk of this study involves attention to works in Nana Asamu's collection, which include poetic works in large categories. Those works influenced by the Quran and the Sunnah includes mnemonic guides to facilitate memorization of the Quran, stories based on the Sunnah, elegies, and poems about medicine of the Prophet. Historical works include influences from the Sharia and eulogies. Works inspired in a Sufi context reflect Kalawa and Dakir experience in account of Sufi women and Panagari. Most of these reflected collaborative creativity, but several works best exemplify the collaborative technique with members of the community and the reworking of poems that were commonly known in the region, some of which are directly related to 10th century manuscripts, influenced by 10th century Panagaric or focus on Abbasid concepts of state. Nearly all Asamu's work testify to direct influence by earlier works. All of them can be understood in the context of her Islamic education. Steeped as it was in the study of Quran and the Sunnah, the canon of works represent not a static preserved collection of old works, but a vital collection of materials that includes both the classic and contemporary composition inspired by both earlier and contemporary works. A single manuscript represents but a moment in the continued variation of material used for study. Some of these new creations in turn became part of a new, ever-changing canon of works in a fluid context of learning. All right, so if you guys want to check this out, just look up the meaning of Timbuktu, and these are the names of the authors. Okay, and this was written in 2008, so that was around 13 years ago. Okay, so it's interesting. It's interesting that the passage spoke about women scholars in the area of West Africa. My bad. Yeah, it's interesting that that passage spoke about women scholars in the various region of Nigeria and other parts of the country, and especially those in the Sufi, because where I was taught in the Sunni Islam, right, you had women educators, but women can only educate children, okay, and that was it. They could not educate adults like both men and women, so they was only able to educate children and women only. And of course, in that same school, I was also taught that women could not lead prayer and they were not allowed to call the adhan. But it's funny that women were able to learn how to read the Quran and memorize the Quran, because when I went to a Muslim school before, that's what we had to learn how to do. We had to learn, that was part of the curriculum. We had to learn how to memorize the Quran and learn how to, you know, and we had to say them. You know what I'm saying? You had to say the Quran because that was just a part of the curriculum. But yeah, in various places, see, people have the misconception thinking that every part of Africa was just totally patriarchal, and that's not true. And as Dr. John Henry Clark tells you, that in certain parts, especially in the western part of it, there were women who were in position of power. There were women who were running institution, and etc. All right, so you have a concept of the patriarchal and the matriarchal, so it's a balance. Okay, and it also depends on what tribe the individual come from. So you can be belong to this particular tribe, right? And if that tribe is based off the patrilineal bloodline, then that's the tribe that you go by. Or if this tribe is based off the matrilineal bloodline, then that's the tribe that you go by. So it's a lot of things, or there's a lot of misconception that we have here in the West, especially when it comes to the African culture, that everything was just totally patriarchal, and it's not the case. That's not necessarily true. You know what I mean? So it's a balance of both. You know what I mean? But we come from a Western mindset, and we think on the level of that white supremacy ideology, the patriarchal white supremacy ideology. That's what we dealing with. All right. So I'm gonna show another source, and I'm gonna post these articles and sources up on my Facebook page so people can, read them for their own personal usage or whatever. Okay, so this one, is called The Monuments and Traditional Know-How, the example of mosque in Timbuktu. Okay, and this was written in 2018, where it was published in December 18th of 2018. But it's actually the original copy came out in 2006. All right. And it's written by Ali Alud Sadi. Ali Alud Sadi. And the name of it is Museum International. So let's go down to where I got highlighted. All right, so it's called, so this is dealing with the mosque. So these three mosques that I mentioned earlier, Okay, so the three mosques that I had mentioned earlier, Mesa was called the University of Timbuktu. So let's go ahead and look at it. It says Timbuktu, a metropolis during the Middle Ages, whose foundation dates back to the first centuries of written history, has approximately 15 mosques distributed throughout its various neighborhoods. Three of these mosques, which have been registered on UNESCO's World Heritage List since 1988, are given special attention by the state and the community of Timbuktu. The Jangar Raber Mosque, a unique place for weekly worship. The Sankore Mosque, which housed the famous University of Timbuktu during the 15th century. The Sadidi Yahya Mosque, where the Eponymous patron saint is buried. The Mosque of Sadidi Yahya, initially built out of Bangkok during the 15th century, was almost entirely reconstructed from limestone in 1922. Little rebuilding and maintenance are therefore necessary. On the other hand, the first two mosques which are much larger, are entirely built of Bangkok. Exposure to the elements and frequent use by numerous worshippers and visitors have contributed to their daily deterioration. Since early times, once a year, seasonal collective rebuilding works are organized for these two mosques, encouraged by the administrative and religious authority and financially supported by the middle classes. These repairs mobilize all the local population and are directed by the important families of Masons in Timbuktu. All right, so right here, let's look at the mosque. So let's look at Jinga Raber, Sankore, and Sidi Yahia are situated in the old town, which has been recognized in its entirety as a national heritage site by decree in 1992 to 242. The mosques are typical of Sudanese architecture, characterized by massive pillars of interior courtyard, a pyramid-shaped minaret. However, these cultural properties, which constitutes the first university centers in Timbuktu, have specificities linked to their location and their function, but also to the type of maintenance they receive. Jinga Raber Mosque is located at the extreme west of the old town, in the neighborhood to which it has given its name. Dating from 1325, it was financed by donation from the Emperor of Mali, Kanku Musa, who paid the Andalusian architect Abu Ishaq Asahili Atu Wajan 4,000 gold of Cows for its construction. So I guess it's like coins. It is bordered to the north and to the east by houses, and the west by the Sheikh Sidi bin Amir Aragadi Cemetery and Asayuti School, and to the south by the Sheikh Sidi El Bekaye Fort, covering a surface area of around 5,000 square meters. The mosque interior is divided into 8 large rows, separated by doors, 2 large courtyards, one intended for prayer during the summer months, and the other for stocking construction materials, palm trees, trunks, limestone, drain pipes, and the like make up the structure. Except for a small part of the northern facade built from the limestone, the mosque is made entirely of Bangkok. The east facade features a minaret around 10 meters high, which indicates the direction of the Kaaba. The roof, made of branches and palm tree Joseph, is covered with palm mating, opening allow air and light to enter. The large Jenga Raber Mosque is sparsely decorated. Only the wall surrounding the mihrab is painted white and yellow with a few piratical inscription echoing Oriental art. The Sankore Mosque is located in the northeast of the city on a sand dune in the neighborhood of the same name, much smaller than Janga Reba Mosque, measuring barely 50 meters long by 25 meters wide. It has a prestigious past because of the university it housed until the 16th century, which had 25,000 students. And it says the mosque is constructed entirely of blanco with a 15-meter high minaret. Its architectural style is similar to that of Djangareba. The interior is composed of three colonnades defining the rows for prayers in winter and a courtyard for summer prayers. The interior has been equipped with electricity and running water. The major conservation problem is due to sand encroachment. The interior and the doors have been reduced to ground level as a consequence of the advanced desert. In addition, the mosque location near a school and a large public square frequented by pedestrians and vehicles has contributed to its deterioration. All righty. Let's see. What else can I find here? The city Yahya Mosque is located in the old city center in the Bajande quarter. It is bordered on the south by the Municipal Museum, on the east by a series of houses, and on the west by one of the city's main arteries. This mosque, which appeared to be best maintained, is located in Angara Kunda sector, a middle-class neighborhood with inhabitants who descend from the Wangagra, former tradespeople during the Ghana Empire. In addition to the traditional courtyards intended for summer and winter prayer, a third courtyard to the south has been transformed into a cemetery. All right. Also, it goes into the history about the masonry. So in Timbuktu, the history of masonry closely follows the history of places of worship, and the development of architecture was brought about with the construction of different mosques. The secret guilds, master craftsmen in this type of architecture are often cited among the mysteries of Timbuktu. Each time the prestigious past of the city is invoked, Mohammed Alassane Haidara, the first president of the National Assembly of the Republic of Mali, declared the mystery of Timbuktu is found in the ponds populated by supernatural genesis in alley hunts on winter nights by tutelary spirits. It is also found in its amulets and talisman, in the effective practices of its healer, and the secret guilds of its blacksmiths and masons. Today, in order to illustrate the mason's magical power, oral tradition recounts that the real masons changed into a lizard when the wall that he was built fell down. The Haminhu and Kabahu families maintain close collaborative relation and mutual respect. They consult each other for community repairs. Therefore, when one of these families end up working in other territories, that family must inform the others ahead of time. During restoration work on the mosque of Sankore and Dejinga Reber, the two Masonic families provided mutual assistance, and because of their supernatural powers, conduct rites and sacrifices reserved for the initiates. All right. And right here it goes on to say, a Timbuktu Mason is the master craftsman who executes the work, but he is also the architect, still recognizable today with his wide straw hat. The Mason was once from a respected caste. Today, the profession formerly passed on from father to son has been liberalized. Anyone can now become a Mason, though Timbuktu society reserved professional honors and privilege for the families who are the repositories of its ontological values. Thus, provided with such prerogatives and socio-professional legitimacy, the figure of Masons participates in the construction of mosques. All right. So, again, you guys can check this out. Just look up the name, the title, and you can check this out from TaylorandFrancisOnline.com. That's the website, tnfonline.com, which is Taylor and Francis, a website that is a peer-reviewed website that deal with a lot of scholarly sources and journals and all that great stuff. So you guys can check it out here. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop for now, but I will come back later on to do the part 2 video focusing on Islamic Golden Age, all right, the medieval period. So, but I wanted to focus more on Timbuktu. As you can see, it's a lot of information. It's a lot of sources. But anyways, you guys have a wonderful day, a wonderful afternoon, and enjoy your Ramadan. So again, Ramadan Mubarak to all you people out there that's celebrating Ramadan. Please be safe and be safe during this pandemic. So thank you guys for those of you that was watching. And make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share the channel, all this great stuff. And until then, I will connect with you guys later with the topic about Islamic Golden Age. So peace and power elevation be to you. Assalamu alaikum.